Frogs Today pregame show. I'm Maggie Hale. Alongside me, Courtney Stockhaus, ahead of TCU and Houston match. It is TCU's first road game of the season, first Big 12 conference game with, our new Big 12 foe. Kickoff 7 p.m. tonight. Well, we've got a lot to talk about here. TCU last week coming up with a win in the win column for them, now up 1-1 on the season. They got that win over Nicholls State, 41-6. Lots to talk about with that. We're going to hear from Sonny and his press conference, and then we're going to hear from a couple of other guys, and then we're also going to give you a preview of State of the Frogs. We've got Sonny kind of talking about what he's looking forward to ahead of Houston tonight, and then we're going to give you our takes, of course, and with the Stars, we've got a lot to talk about today.
We have a great show, but first, let's go ahead and take a look at Nicholls State highlights.
Low snap, and the punt is blocked. Scooped up by TCU, and run in for a touchdown. Special teams score. Blake Nowell.
I mean, that might be one of the biggest takeaways in games like this. Ball slow to the ground on the snap. A little hesitation from the punter, and sure enough, the special teams make a huge play.
And they have fared well against FBS opponents in the past. 3rd and 12. Morris under pressure. He's got a canyon to run through. Chandler Morris with a first down. Oh, putting the moves on for the touchdown. Chandler Morris, that was absurd. Yards. Back, a former triple option quarterback in high school, Guggenheim, taking the direct snap. Did he get it? Needed a half yard. Extend the chains. TCU ball. The line. McQuaid to the perimeter. And LeMay with his second grab, and he's turned back as he crosses the 45. Obi Izor and Avery Helm on the pop pass for TCU. First down at the 14. Morris toward the end zone, and it's a touchdown. Falling in, Jalen Robinson.
Covers it up when he hits the ground.
So 3rd and 8, Pat McQuaid under duress, and he's buried. A sack from 57. Griffin Kell, the all Big 12 kicker, a career long on the way. And he nailed it. Practice. Morris clean pocket, down the middle. And the catch is made by JoJo Earl inside the 20. Morris to the edge, and Thompson. And Thompson taken down by Jordan Jackson at that position.
That's the biggest thing. They are loaded.
Morris to the goal line. Touchdown! JoJo Earl. Ball is knocked out of Jalen Spears' hands, and it's scooped up by TCU. Chase Biddle has it. Hoover over the middle, in stride. Bailey to the end zone. Touchdown. So the number 2 offense puts it in here at the end. And this went the way that it should for TCU. 41-6 the final.
TCU with a much cleaner game last week than they did play against Colorado. But as Sonny said, there's always room to improve. So let's go ahead and take a look at the offensive passing production for the night. Chandler Morris getting definitely more comfortable with receivers. I mean, Sonny Dykes talked about that in his presser as well. His passing yards, almost double. 279 versus Colorado and 442 versus Nicholls State. I mean, that is a huge difference, and that just shows the kind of trust that he's now having in these guys to be able to throw out those long passes and really just air it out too. Even the short slant routes, he's able to trust them more, so we saw definitely a lot more production on the passing side. And Colorado passing targets were 42. Nicholls State passing targets 33, also indicating that, he was able to air out a longer pass rather than trying to take those little passes to inch up slowly on the field. He was really able to trust his guys to outrun those defensive backs and really just air out the football down the field. And the time of possession, TCU had more success as well over there. They're still not winning in the time of possession column, which is interesting looking at TCU being able to win the game and not win in the time of possession column. But I think that's also good that, they're keeping TCU's offense off the field, and the defense is really wearing out the other team's offense, being able to stay out there for so long as well and holding them to just 6 points. And, there was more success on the pass, obviously. We're averaging 9.1 yards per catch. Like I said, that's a lot more explosive than the game prior. And aside from Chandler Morris, they got the second string backup quarterback Josh Hoover involved, the sophomore. He had two possessions that I think he would love to get back. I mean, they both ended in fumbles. We talked to Sonny about that post-game on the post-game show. If you haven't seen that, definitely go check it out. A lot of insight there. But, I think, as Sonny said, there were a lot of other things that happened, which is why at the end, as Sonny said, he doesn't like to run up a score on a team when they're obviously already winning in the fourth quarter. But he made a decision between running up the score and boosting his backup quarterback's confidence. He did end up getting that touchdown. So I think that was really exciting to see from Josh Hoover, kind of getting him in early as opposed to like Chandler sat last season, obviously due to injury, but wasn't able to get in much. I think we might have seen Chandler really pop off quicker in the first game of the season if he was able to play more last season.
In terms of rushing, Amani Bailey stepped up once again. Against Colorado, he had 14 carries for 164 yards, something we talked about last week, the most we've seen since Kendra Miller back in 2021. Amani Bailey has some big shoes to carry, but he stepped up again week 2 with 19 carries for 67 yards against Nicholls State. This lower number of yardage could be due to the correlation of Colorado having a weaker defensive line, which is something we talked about week 1, and a lot of analysts mentioned this as well. Chandler Morris on the run. Sonny said week 1, if his running backs were being productive, there's no need for Chandler to run the ball. However, he had 6 carries for 63 yards, averaging 10.5 yards per carry, and had 1 rushing touchdown. Chandler was able to run the ball against Colorado as well, but he also noted that he's always able to count on number 9, Amani Bailey.
Absolutely. That trust is definitely something we're going to discuss a little bit later. And Houston last week held Rice to similar rushing stats. I think this might be an indicator that TCU will once again see a more productive offense on the pass rather than the rushing yards. But of course, we're going to have to see how that plays out. And as for the defensive production, they held Nicholls State to 6 points, comprised of 2 field goals, 1 in the second and 1 in the third. So, they went into halftime, with that team having 3 points only. And that was definitely a victory in it of itself for TCU compared to the week before. And versus Nicholls State, they had 6 tackles for loss, 76 total tackles. Nambi Obiezor led the team in tackles with 13 total and 9 solo. 1 defensive touchdown from Blake Knoll as well, and boy was that a crowd pleaser when that one happened. We were on the field for that, and boy did it get loud. Versus Colorado, the team had 7 tackles for loss, 78 total tackles, and Johnny Hodges led the team in tackles with 14 total and 9 solo stats. Interesting also to see the stats by the numbers right there. They're very similar, and it's interesting to see how much of a different production that game was, even though the stats were very similar. Something we can talk about a little bit later as to why that might be. And stats talk, but so do the team's takeaways. Let's go ahead and take a look at what Sonny Dykes had to say this week at the post-game presser.
Yeah, it's been a good week so far. We got back at it on Sunday, had a really good, productive practice on Sunday. Guys had a great mentality and a great attitude. And then I thought we had our best Tuesday practice so far of the year today, so I was encouraged to see that. I think our guys are anxious about playing, excited about playing, and ready to get out there and know that we're going to face a Houston team that's going to be really excited to play us, and it's a great opportunity for them to bounce back, and I think our guys know the challenge is going to be big for us on Saturday, and I think they're working really hard to go out and play well.
A lot to unpack right there, and we've got them for you. 3 of our, I guess you could say maybe like our top 3 quotes from Sonny's presser in that little clip we showed you guys. A lot to unpack. Let's go ahead and get right into that one.
I was still a little bit frustrated at times. I mean, just, we didn't run the ball as well as I would have liked. Now, there's some reasons. Part of those reasons were us, and part of them were scheme related, and then we tried to just stick with it. And so sometimes you kind of felt like you were banging your head against a wall at times.
My favorite part about that one is that last sentence kind of just felt like we were banging our head against the wall at times. Boy, does that paint a mental picture for you. Absolutely. But going into what that kind of means for the team as well, not just that last part, but running the ball as well. We kind of just mentioned that with Amani Bailey.
Yeah, in terms of numbers, obviously, we just talked about 164 yards against Colorado and 67 yards in terms of rushing for Nicholls State. So that kind of should have been flipped because Colorado's
obviously a much better team.
And so we should have seen those numbers against Nicholls State up in the 100s for Amani, and that's something that they're hoping to improve this upcoming week, I think.
Yeah, and speaking of improvement, Sonny had something to say about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, you want your team to get better fast, and we had a huge amount of improvement that needed to take place from week 1 to week 2, and it did. But you want more. You want to kind of be at that point where you say, okay, we're ready to go. And I honestly, our performance thus far this season has probably mirrored our performance a little bit last season. We had a better Colorado team we played week 1. If we had played a really good Colorado team last year, I don't know how we would have fared in that game. You know what I mean? And so, we're still trying to find our way, and I think that we're headed to the right direction, and again, I like our sense of urgency to get there, and so I'm encouraged by that.
Huge improvement needed to take place from week 1 to week 2, and it did.
I think it absolutely did in terms of the passing, like we just discussed. They almost doubled their passing stats, Chandler Morris that being, but as he always says as well, there's always room for improvement, and I think that room for improvement is on the rushing.
Absolutely. They mentioned in the press conference as well, every week is a new week. You go into it as a new game. We're going to discard this last week against Nicholls State. So what, that we didn't have as much passing yards as we wanted to, but that's going to be improved this week. It's a new game. It's a new week. It's a new time for improvement.
Absolutely, yeah, and he also mentioned that Chandler Morris just getting a lot more comfortable. He's knowing when to run the ball now. We saw Chandler be more productive on the rush as well. He kind of talked about, why would I run Chandler if my guys are being productive? So I think last week maybe we should have seen Chandler running the ball a little bit more with those guys unable to be productive, but nevertheless, like you just said, it is a new week. And Sonny also said, I've said it over and over again 3 or 4 times, 3 or 4 games in the last year. We were probably a slightly below average football team. We had tremendous buy-in leadership and some guys stepped up, that being last season. If we had played a little better Colorado team last year, I don't know how we would have fared. Now that's a bold statement to make. Obviously that team last season going to the national championship game, and him saying, that team was just as good as this team is right now. And Courtney, I've looked at the numbers. This team is better than the last year's team week 1. Going by the numbers last season, TCU versus Colorado week 1, 37 yards, Max Duggan and Chandler Morris combined, no passing touchdowns, and there was a sack. TCU versus Colorado week 1, 2 weeks ago, 279 yards, Chandler Morris, 2 receiving touchdowns, 3 rushing touchdowns, 4 sacks. And those sacks are not on our offense. Those are our defense recording those sacks. I'd argue that not only is the start of the season comparable, but TCU is a much better team than they started with last season.
Yeah, I think Sonny is being a little bit hard, as he should be, though. You know, it's just the start of the season, so like we said, there's so much room for improvement. But in terms of comparing this year and last season, we are a much better team. But, you know,
kind of hold off on your cause for concern right there a little bit, I think was the message he might have been trying to send. And I think that's something that I think maybe the guys have heard a lot of negativity. At this point, they need a little bit of a boost, you know? They didn't win as much as they would have liked to last week. We thought maybe that would give them a boost. But going into it's the first Big 12 conference game of the season. In conference game, it's Houston. It's a new team they've never played before. I mean, they want to go in with confidence, especially with it being on the road. And a lot to unpack from last week's game, but also a lot to look forward to. Tonight, our very own J.W. Wilson sat down with Sonny Dykes earlier this week to discuss what's coming up with Houston.
Well, good football team. They've played two really hard-fought, close games. Played a game where they beat UTSA, kind of a low-scoring game. And then got into a little bit of a shootout, got off to a bad start last week against Rice and lost in overtime. And so they're a good football team. I mean, when you look at the strength of their team, they got a really good defensive front. I think they're built strong up front on really both lines of scrimmage. I think both their tackles are good players on offense and a good football team. As you would expect from Houston, they're always going to have good skill position players. Three really good receivers, two guys that can really run, and then somebody that works the middle of the field that's a really good route runner and a good athlete as well and can catch the ball and is very productive. A quarterback that's got a lot of experience, started last year at Texas Tech, has transferred over to Houston. We played against him last year. Really, really good runner, big, powerful guy that can move the pile, can get first downs. Anytime you face a running quarterback like this, it's always a challenge. And then also a good thrower and really throws well on the move. So their offense will present a lot of, difficult things for us. Defensively, again, built up front, really a good couple of pass rushers, 9 and 10 are two really elite level defensive ends and kind of outside linebacker guys that can move around and pressure the quarterback and, some experience on the back end, some guys that can cover, some length. Just an overall good football team. And again, as you would expect, a really good returners. They've always got speed and guys that can get their hands on the ball and do something with it. Had a long punt return against UTSA. And so, some guys that have done some good things for them.
Right. So conference opener for us, first Big 12 conference game for Houston ever. So hopefully this turns into a lovely in-state rivalry for us. It's obviously a natural rivalry once we start playing.
Yeah. They'll be excited to play. They really will. I mean, they lost a hard-fought game last week against a rival. Playing the first Big 12 game at home in their history. So I'm sure it'll be a sold-out crowd. I'm sure it'll be loud. I'm sure their players will be excited. It's a great opportunity for these guys to get on the map, and so we're going to see their best effort. We're going to see an excited team, a team that's got their back against the wall, and a team that's going to come out and play really well. So, our guys understand that. They know what the challenge is going to be, and they're looking forward to it.
Tonight is TCU's first Big 12 conference game, as we've mentioned. Houston getting a 1-1 start, very similar to TCU. Reverse for them. They won week 1, lost week 2, and boy, did they have a heartbreaker loss. They tried to come back. They were originally down 21-7 at halftime, tried to battle a comeback, ended up going to double overtime. Just missed that 2-point conversion in double overtime. What a way to lose. That's never a way you want to lose, and that really does mean they're showed up, they're fired up, they're ready to play us this week, and Houston is definitely looking forward towards a revenge game. And obviously for TCU, going into those offensive keys, consistency. Sonny talked in the presser Tuesday about knowing what to expect for the running backs, the wide receivers, and overall just a clean, consistent offensive performance. You want to be able to know what to expect when you send that offense out on the field, and I think that's a key for anyone playing any game, but especially as TCU wants to build on this week 2 performance, kind of definitely throwing away week 1, throwing out the negativities from week 2, but really building on that performance. TCU wants to get a lot more consistent, knowing that every time they send out that offense, it's going to result in points, whether that be a touchdown or a field goal.
You talked a lot about building. Chandler Morris needs to build off of his week 2 performance, and Sonny Dykes talked about that earlier this week. He said that Chandler was getting a lot more comfortable on the game. No more panicking, and more importantly, no more turnovers. Last week there were 2 turnovers, but it's important to note that both of those were from Josh Hoover late in the game. He also has been able to trust his players. Chandler mentioned that he's been able to trust Amani Bailey at any moment to take the ball.
Absolutely, a lot of trust going on with that team. Speaking of Amani Bailey, you know exactly what I'm about to say. TCU's got to get more increased run game production. I mean, that team has Kendall Briles as their offensive coordinator, who we have mentioned every single week, had a top 10 rushing offense last season. You know, they have that foundation set. We knew there was big shoes to fill with Kendre Miller being gone. I mean, how do you fill the shoes of a 3rd-round draft pick? But this team has now been in a game setting for 2 games. And I think week 3 is the game where we're really expecting, okay, this is time for you to kick it into full gear. The jitters are off. You had a loss. You had a win. You know what to expect now from an in-game setting. You know that you're the starter now. You know how that feels. It's time to really just kick it into full gear and trust in the foundation and that game plan you have in front of them, which is something that a lot of the guys said right before Nicholls State, just trusting in that game plan. And we've got a ton of keys for Houston as well. So let's go ahead and get into those. What's our first key?
That first key is being more productive in the first half of the game. Houston went into halftime last week down 28-7. This is something they'll definitely not want to repeat this week with TCU, knowing that TCU is a second half team. They'll want to steer clear of that lead early on.
Absolutely, and something else they're going to want to do is keep that quarterback protected. Last week he was sacked 3 times against Rice. We know how sack trigger happy our guys are on defense. You know, they're always fired up, especially Johnny Hodges, you know, giving that team that extra energy, that extra push that they really needed to be productive on that defense. They are not going to want to leave that quarterback uncovered, especially because we know you leave a quarterback uncovered, he's going to throw an interception. I mean, and that's just how it works. A lot of quarterback pressure makes those guys nervous. And out of all guys on the field, the quarterback is the guy I don't want nervous.
Absolutely. And that final key to the game for Houston is their run game. They have a very similar rushing output to TCU, and Houston has their very own Amani Bailey. Dean Connors was their rushing leader versus Rice, and he had 8 carries for 48 yards. But he had 0 touchdowns at the end of the game.
A lot to talk about on this defense this week, but before we even get into that, let's go ahead and hear from the defensive guys themselves. Nambi Obiazor was in the press conference room this week, last Tuesday, had a lot to say about Houston upcoming. Let's go ahead and take a look.
I'd probably have to say like RPO, or just the ability of the quarterback being able to run. So I just have to say, like, we'd have to have good eye discipline, and just everybody has to do their 1/11th, and then just if he starts to run, don't leave your man too early until he crosses the line of scrimmage, and just make sure we do everything right. Us as a defense, we were talking about that, just trying to keep him out the end zone. So we were just trying to fly around, be fast, physical, and just make some plays. I feel like that chip on your shoulder, to be honest with you, from like last year, I feel like it really never went away, because no matter how many games we win, people is always saying something. So, and like even how last season ended, like we kind of all summer were thinking about it and trying to just write a new season.
Obiazor with a lot of great insight into what that defense is looking to do, obviously keeping them out of the end zone, and then as well learning that they are still playing with that chip on their shoulder mentality. I mean, that's bound to create some good defensive positioning for them. And our first key, stay physical. I mean, those guys need to force turnovers, pressure, and really put their body on the line. Johnny Hodges talked a lot about this. He got very fired up about this. And once he talked about this, we saw them act this out in week 2. So I think just building on that and making sure that they're continuing to be more aggressive on the defense. You know, Sonny even talked about he doesn't mind taking those penalties that are there for aggression, not those false start, not those, you know, those regular ones. You know, he wants to take not the fundamentals, but a pass interference every once in a while. I mean, it's bound to happen when you're playing good defense.
Absolutely. For our second key to the game, going back to Johnny Hodges, he mentioned this last week, it's trusting the game plan. You know, it's talked a lot about Joe Gillespie and the defense. What the guys really need to do is trust their gut, trust their coach, and listen to Gillespie, and the rest will be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the rest is just what they've been practicing all week. It's just time for them to act this out. Johnny Hodges mentioned that, obviously. He talked a ton about just executing that game plan. And moving on to Houston, they're going to want to put on a lot of quarterback pressure on TCU, that is, kind of transitioning from that key. That was an offensive one, avoiding that pressure. And now Houston's going to want to put on a ton of pressure for Chandler Morris. You never want a quarterback in the pocket shaky. You never want a quarterback pressured in the pocket. That goes for any team. I think that's always a defensive key, a huge one as well. But Houston specifically has some great pass rushers. So I think if they can put the pressure on Chandler Morris, TCU is in for some interceptions, and that's not what you want to see TCU do this week.
That second key to the game for Houston is being able to create turnovers. Especially in the first half, they're going to want to keep their offense on the field for as long as possible. Sonny Dykes talked earlier this week that this is something they're going to be watching on film from Houston because it's something they know that they're capable of. Every time TCU's opponent has gotten a turnover, it's really set them back. So that's something that Houston will be wanting to look for and complete this week.
Absolutely. Sonny Dykes really just praising that Houston team as much as he did Colorado and Nicholls State. Those boys are never looking at a game like it isn't, the biggest game of the season. And Sonny Dykes also revealed the team will be traveling with an expanded travel team. They're allowed to do this once a year, and they knew from the beginning of the season that they were going to do this for Houston. Kind of interesting. Not sure why they picked Houston, but nevertheless, I'm sure we'll find out this week tonight after they play the big game. Kickoff at 7, remember that. And once we come back, we'll have our closing and our stars of the game.
We wouldn't be able to do the things we were able to do this year without the Flying T Club. So we got to continue to get people involved. It's more important right now than it's ever been.
Flying T is special. It's the best thing that I've encountered in college. It allows us to be able to offset a lot of the costs that our scholarships aren't able to cover. If people like winning, invest in the Flying T Club and NIL.
It's almost a necessity now in the college football world. You got to kind of invest in the programs, and what you put in is what you get out.
Higginbotham, we put people first. So we simply start by listening to you. Whether you're searching for customized insurance, HR, or financial solutions to protect your home, car, health, business, or employees, our specialists are here to serve you, the people you care about, and your success. Higginbotham, insurance, HR, and financial services. Inspired by you.
Simply the best barbecue in Fort Worth. Dine in, catering, or drive-through. 2900 Montgomery, just off I-30. Remember, the best barbecue in Fort Worth is at Railhead Smokehouse.
As always, our favorite part of the show, picking out who we think is really going to shine tonight and who we saw shine all week through practice and the pressers. Of course, I'll go first. My pick for today might be a little unconventional, but I'm going to go with Savion Williams. He's been here for 4 years. He's a senior now, and he's been kind of quiet this season, as well as last season as well. He's been behind Quentin Johnston for most of his college career. And like we've talked about with the running backs and Kendre Miller, it's kind of hard for any of these wide receivers to get those touches when you're behind a first-round draft pick. But I'm expecting to see Savion Williams do big things. Sonny talked a lot about him in practice this week, saying that he was super vital to the team in practice. He was practicing hard, and he talked a ton about leaders emerging. Savion Williams is one of those guys that he mentioned. He mentioned a couple of other guys, but Savion was definitely one of him. And because he's been here for 4 years, he knows Chandler, I'm kind of expecting him to merge into kind of that Mr. Reliable scenario. And I think, he can just be a real big leader on that offense. And I think that's exactly kind of what TCU needs right now to reel in that offense.
This week, my star of the game is Jack Besh. As you just mentioned, Sonny Dykes is looking to see more emerging leaders, not only on the field, but off the field as well. So this week, it doesn't necessarily have to be his offensive performance, but his leadership off the field. I think what we can see from these offensive guys this week could be in result of what Jack Besh says as a leader off the field.
Absolutely. I think a lot of what this offensive production is going to come from right now is those leaders emerging. Sonny's been talking about it for 2 weeks. It's time for, week 3. Let's see that ramp up, and let's see that put into action for that. And that's going to do it for our show today. But of course, we've always got more content. Don't forget, also the big game coming up in 30 minutes, 7 p.m. It's kickoff against Houston at Houston, but we've also got a ton of stuff that we've been doing earlier through the week. We have our Players Club that we did with a couple of baseball guys. Go ahead and check that out after the game. State of the Frogs, we gave you a little bit of a preview, but it's always good to check out those things. There's a lot going on over at frogstoday.com. You don't want to miss it. So from all of us here at Frogs Today, I'm Maggie Hale.
I'm Courtney Stockhaus.
Go Frogs.